The Soviet-Afghan War is one of the most tragic and controversial chapters in the history of the late Soviet Union. During the nearly 10-year occupation of Afghanistan, from December 25, 1979, to May 1988, hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers went through the crucible of conflict. This war claimed the lives of more than 15,000 Soviet servicemen and became a real test for an entire generation. Many books have been written about it, and dozens of feature films and documentaries have been made, most of which show heroism, friendship, devotion to the motherland, and the harsh conditions of service. However, one topic remains in the shadows: desertion. It is not customary to talk about it in official historiography or in veteran circles, as if deserters did not exist at all. But they did. And they were not isolated cases. Some of them were captured and forced to survive at any cost. Others consciously defected to the Mujahideen, renouncing their oath and former ideals. Some became disillusioned with the war, some could not withstand the moral pressure, and some may have been bribed or broken. This topic is uncomfortable. It destroys the heroic image, raises questions and contradictions. Nevertheless, in order to understand the war as a whole, it is necessary to look at its dark side. And today we will talk about the other side of the Afghan campaign, about those who left their own and stayed with the enemy. During the entire period of the Soviet military presence in Afghanistan, many of our soldiers ended up in the enemy camp, in the Mujahideen camps, for a variety of reasons. Some of them were taken prisoner and never returned, while others deliberately left, unable to withstand the harsh conditions of service, moral pressure, humiliation, or fear of death. Some blended in with the local population, settled down, started families, converted to Islam, and refused to return to their homeland. There were also those who, after being held captive, voluntarily or under pressure joined the ranks of the Mujahideen and began fighting against their former comrades in arms. According to official data announced by Valery Oblazov, deputy chairman of the State Committee of Ukraine for Veterans Affairs, 417 Soviet soldiers were captured by the Mujahideen during the entire Afghan campaign. Of these, 130 were released and returned home before the end of the conflict. About 100 servicemen died, including some who suffered a terrible, agonizing death. More than 60 soldiers converted to Islam, adapted to life in their new environment, started families, and assimilated into Afghan culture to such an extent that they no longer felt connected to the USSR. Some of the deserters were recruited by the Mujahideen and not only lived among them but also actively participated in combat operations against Soviet troops, serving as instructors, translators, and guides. Often, it was these people who knew the combat tactics of the Soviet army and passed information to the enemy, which led to losses among Soviet soldiers. Many of these defectors are still alive today. Over the decades, they have completely blended in with the local population, changed their names, and do not even think about returning to the former Soviet Union. Too much has changed both in the country and in their own lives. According to the Russian Union of Afghanistan Veterans, as of February 15, 1989, there were 64 Soviet servicemen on the official lists who were recognized as deserters. They defected to the Mujahideen and began fighting against their former comrades. According to other, less official sources, the number of Soviet soldiers who defected to the Mujahideen could have been as high as 100. This number remains a subject of debate to this day, as much of this topic is still shrouded in secrecy. In December 1989, after the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Afghanistan, the Supreme Soviet of the USSR decided to grant amnesty to all former Soviet military personnel who had committed crimes while in Afghanistan, including desertion and defection to the enemy. This decision automatically exempted them from criminal liability. Thus, from a legal point of view, from that moment on, there were no longer any traitors to the motherland in the Soviet-Afghan War. However, from the point of view of public perception and moral assessment, such actions continued to provoke strong condemnation, especially among combat veterans. Despite the amnesty and legal rehabilitation, many of the former deserters never decided to return to their homeland. Too much time had passed, and the homeland itself had changed by that point. The USSR was on the verge of collapse, the familiar world was crumbling, and many saw no point in returning to a country that, in essence, no longer existed in its former form. Until recently, employees of the CIS Committee for Internationalist Soldiers worked to find Soviet soldiers who had gone missing in Afghanistan. As a result of painstaking searches, 29 such people were found. Of these, only 22 agreed to return home, taking advantage of the amnesty and state assistance offered. The remaining 7 refused, preferring to stay in Afghanistan, where they had assimilated over the years, started families, bought houses, and built new lives. They no longer felt part of the Soviet or post-Soviet world. Nevertheless, 266 people are still listed as missing. Their fate remains unknown. Some may have died in the mountains, some bodies were never found, and some may still be living in remote areas of Afghanistan under different names, completely assimilated into the local population. Many years have passed since the last Soviet tank left Afghanistan, ending one of the most difficult and bloody conflicts in the history of the USSR. However, even decades later, the ghosts of this protracted military presence still roam the mountain slopes and dusty trails of northern Afghanistan. This is not only about the memories that live on in the minds of veterans, but also about real people, former Soviet soldiers who remained in a foreign country, in a foreign society, among people who were once hostile but have now become close. They lead the same lifestyle as the locals. They herd cattle, grow grain, work in craft shops, wear traditional Pashtun clothing, and speak local dialects. And although their skin is noticeably lighter than that of native Afghans, this hardly surprises anyone anymore. Over more than 30 years, they have become an integral part of the villages and communities where fate once brought them. Afghanistan has become more than just a refuge for them. It has become their new homeland, with which they have grown together like the roots of a tree with the earth. Their children attend Afghan schools, practice Islam, and know about the Soviet Union only from their fathers' stories. Dozens of stories circulated in the army about how Soviet soldiers would disappear without a trace at night when they left the base perimeter to get water or cigarettes. Local mujahideen, who knew the area like the back of their hand, skillfully set up ambushes and kidnapped soldiers. Those who converted to Islam were often spared. Sometimes they were even treated with respect, as strong warriors who had managed to change their destiny. Over time, they completely adapted to life among the Pashtun. They changed their names, married local girls, and took part in village life. At times, it became almost impossible to determine who was in front of you, a former Soviet soldier or an Afghan peasant, because their appearance no longer gave anything away, and their clothing and habits had long since become the same. Upon learning of the soldiers' disappearance, the Soviet command sent out search parties. Villages were combed, shelters were checked, and the civilian population was questioned. But more often than not, all this was useless. A man who was captured and converted to Islam seemed to disappear into thin air. His trail vanished as quickly as the wind blows away footprints in the sand. In 1989, when an amnesty was declared, the state gave deserters and prisoners the opportunity to return without the threat of criminal prosecution. However, only a few decided to do so. Some of them, after spending a short time in Russia, realized with horror that the country they had returned to was no longer the one they remembered. The economy ruined by perestroika, lost values, mistrust, and alienation from those around them. All this became a strong argument in favor of returning to where they were already accepted as their own. Each Soviet deserter had their own story, often tragic, complicated, and not without a degree of chance, which ultimately pushed the young soldier to take what seemed like an unthinkable step, to cross over to the other side of the front line. These stories rarely came to light, but behind each one lay a destiny, inner turmoil, fear, the instinct for self-preservation, and sometimes simply the desire to survive and start life with a clean slate, even if it meant living in a foreign country among former enemies. Yuri Stepanov, a native of Bashkiria, was taken prisoner in Afghanistan in the late 1980s, when he was barely 18 years old. Young and frightened, he found himself face to face with the cruel reality of war, without hope of rescue, without contact with his homeland. The Mujahideen, as was often the case, offered him a choice: convert to Islam and live by the new laws, or die. Stepanov chose life. He changed his name to Masik Bulo and became part of a new world. Over time, he settled in, found work at the market, recharging batteries and repairing electronics. He was respected and earned a decent living by local standards. However, despite his outward adaptation, his soul yearned. It was only in 2006, after decades of deliberation, that Yuri decided to return to Russia. His reunion with his homeland was not easy, but he made the choice he had once rejected, to return home. Sergei Krasnoporov from Kurgan ended up on the other side of the barricades not because he was captured, but after an internal conflict. He was accused of trading military property, a serious violation of military service regulations. Fearing punishment and investigation, he voluntarily deserted and joined the Mujahideen. After converting to Islam, he took the name Nur Muhammad and became a bodyguard for one of the famous field commanders, Abdul Rashid Dostum, an ethnic Uzbek and influential leader in northern Afghanistan. Sergei integrated into the local community. He married an Afghan girl and became the father of 6 children. Today, he continues to live in Afghanistan and categorically refuses to return to Kurgan, citing the impossibility of leaving his family, who have become the meaning of his new life. Gennady Tsili from the city of Toretsk in the Donetsk region was captured in 1983, as he himself later admitted, out of stupidity. Curiosity got the better of caution. He decided to go to a nearby village to see how the locals lived. Approaching a mosque, he found himself surrounded by armed men. They took him to a hideout, where he was given a choice: convert to Islam and stay with them, or die. Gennady chose life. I lived under their supervision for 6 years. They forced me to shoot at our own people. They were simply insane. They didn't understand what was good and what was bad. I told them, "Go to hell, I won't shoot at my own people," Gennady recalled in one of his rare interviews in the early 2000s. Even then, he struggled to find the right words, but his voice still betrayed his pain and despair. During his years in the mountains of Afghanistan, he had become a completely different person. The Russian and Ukrainian authorities repeatedly tried to bring him home. They promised him a job, housing, and help with integration. Gennady, his wife, and children were even bought a ticket to Moscow and given $2,000 to get them started. Everything was ready for their return. But literally the day before their departure, he suddenly changed his mind. "I can't leave. My life is here. I'm nobody there," he told his escorts. In the end, he only visited his homeland once, for a few weeks to see his remaining relatives. After his visit, he returned to Afghanistan, where his family, home, and, strange as it may sound, the world in which he had survived and to which he had become accustomed remained. Nikolai Viridov, a native of Kharkiv, had a similar fate. Before leaving for Afghanistan, he told his friends, "Either I'll come back home a hero of the Soviet Union, or I won't come back at all." The latter came true, but not because he died. It was because he never wanted to return. According to Viridov himself, everything changed in one day, when he witnessed a massacre carried out by Soviet troops in one of the Afghan villages. 70 people. Women, children, old people. They just burned everything. I stood there, watching, and didn't understand why. "What for?" he said years later. This event forever changed his consciousness. He fled, joined the Mujahideen, converted to Islam, and took a new name, Nasrallah. He lived under this name for the rest of his life. He was not just a fighter. Thanks to his technical training, Nikolai became an expert in demolition. He was valued for his discipline, precision, and cool head. He participated in ambushes and mining convoys on numerous occasions, and later worked in security. His last employer was none other than Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, the notorious politician and former Prime Minister of Afghanistan. Viridov proudly said that the Mujahideen had a high level of trust in Russians, especially those who could intercept information on Russian radio channels and knew the rules, tactics, and principles of Special Forces operations. When asked, "What is it like to fight against your former compatriots?" Nikolai Viridov, aka Nasrallah, replied simply, almost indifferently, "If you are on the front line, you either fight or die. There is no time to think about who is in front of you. It's either you or him." This was not cruel cynicism, but a cold, hard-won acceptance of the new reality in which he had been living for many years. He had long since ceased to see the fighters on the other side as his own. All that was in the past, erased by the desert sun and the crackle of machine gun fire. After his disappearance in the 1980s, Nikolai continued to be searched for, first by the KGB and military intelligence, then by his father, relatives, and colleagues. They wrote letters, contacted embassies, and tried to find any clues. They hoped that he was alive, that he might be in captivity, that he might one day be exchanged. But year after year passed without any news. It was only in the mid-1990s that it became clear that he was alive and had long since assimilated. Nikolai was no longer in hiding. In one of the eastern districts of Afghanistan, he worked for the local police, wore a uniform, had authority, and was known by the name Nasrallah. The locals respected him for his honesty and fairness. He got married, raised 3 children, and built a house. They said that he helped orphans, remembering what it meant to lose everything and be a stranger among his own people. When Russian diplomats tried to contact him to offer him a return to his homeland, he politely but firmly refused. "My past is there, but my life is here," he said. Russia had changed, and he had changed even more. Nikolai had no intention of returning. For him, it was now a foreign country that he rarely thought about and felt no nostalgia for. Afghanistan had become his homeland, with its mountains, heat, dust, and people, among whom he had finally found his place.